Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. Obviously, one of the hottest topics in gaming, and especially our niche over the past couple of weeks, has been Call of Duty versus Battlefield. With the Battlefield 6 beta just absolutely taking off, it's obviously gained a ton of hype, a ton of traction in the past few weeks, and Call of Duty is in a pretty rough state now based off of online community sentiment, right? So you have a really interesting situation here where the first time in a long time, it almost feels like there might be a bit of a threat to Call of Duty. Not necessarily that Battlefield 6 is going to be the Call of Duty killer like so many people are quick to claim about every new FPS that comes along these days. Nothing realistically is going to kill COD except for Call of Duty itself. However, we recently got some input from one of the previous presidents at Activision Blizzard on this Call of Duty versus Battlefield situation, and the insight's interesting. It is very direct and very blunt, and I think it is already starting to sort of come to fruition in a sense, and the reaction to it is pretty interesting. So this tweet was sent out, Charlie Intel reports on this, from the former Blizzard president, Mike Ybarra. Says Battlefield 6 is going to boot stomp Call of Duty this year, and Mike Ybarra posts on Twitter the other day saying Battlefield will boot stomp Call of Duty this year. I would be very interested in seeing the and obviously it's going to happen here in a few short months, the direct comparison when both of these games are out in full launch, not one versus a beta versus the other one in a season where things are not going all that well. Once Battlefield 6 is fully out and launched in October, and then Black Ops 7 is fully out and launched in November, according to rumors, what the head-to-head is going to look like here, because online sentiment, which keep in mind is very different from the broad player base sentiment, the casual player base that's not, chronically online, oftentimes very different perspective on the game than the online community. But the online sentiment is Battlefield, Battlefield, Battlefield. The hype is there, and it's not the same for Call of Duty, but Battlefield will boot stomp Call of Duty this year. But the real win here is that Call of Duty won't be lazy anymore, and we'll all get better FPS games for it. So what I think is interesting is that Mike Ybarra is not too far removed from being the president at Activision Blizzard. Obviously, Activision has its own stuff going on. Blizzard has its own stuff going on. So we don't know the exact behind-the-scenes crossover of how involved Mike could have been on the Call of Duty situation, since he was at Blizzard, of course, or what exactly his input would be there when he was still there. But obviously, there's sort of a past tense reference being made in his tweet saying Call of Duty won't be lazy anymore, referencing that Call of Duty has been lazy, potentially something he witnessed while he was at Blizzard there. And I think that's not necessarily a large secret. Call of Duty for some time now has known that it's running unopposed. X-Defiant was a bit of a challenger, but of course that just did not meet the mark, and it doesn't even exist anymore. There really hasn't been another major title that's challenged Call of Duty in its space. Yes, you have battle royale titles out there like Fortnite, like Apex, like other games that do well and they draw an audience, but it's not necessarily the large chunk, the large demographic that Call of Duty is focused on. They know they kind of have monopolized the FPS genre. We don't see Halos dropping consistently anymore. We don't see Battlefields dropping and doing well consistently anymore, with the exception of Battlefield 6, which has really changed the competition and changed the perspective here. Back in the golden days when Call of Duty was at its best in terms of sentiment, it seems like, even though the online community was much smaller back then, was, MW2 through BO2 and that sort of time frame where there were consistent Battlefield games dropping, Halo games dropping. There was this large trio at the head of FPS that were always competing with one another. Yes, there are their own individual niche player bases on each of these games. Battlefield for the more realistic gameplay, Call of Duty for the more arcadey stuff, Halo for the more futuristic stuff. But there was also a broad overlap of the FPS genre in general, and there was always a race for who could win that genre. But with the lack of good Battlefield games lately, 2042 didn't really do well. The lack of Halo games in general, Call of Duty hasn't had to work to keep players on its game, and the quality has suffered. So Mike saying this so bluntly on Twitter with the position that he's in, I think is a good thing, and I think it's also a very accurate statement, because this is the same sort of thing that I've referenced in previous videos. While yes, I've been a COD dominant channel for the last decade plus of creating videos, I also enjoy a lot of other games, Battlefield being one of them that I've always played in the past. And when you have a good game like Battlefield, putting pressure on Call of Duty, that is not only good for both of the games outright, because Call of Duty will have its success, Battlefield will have its success. It's the best for us because it's going to challenge each of these publishers to make the better game. If Battlefield is stealing players from Call of Duty is going to have to do something better to get those players back. And then Battlefield's going to have to do something better to get those players back again. I just punched my mic. I'm so sorry. adamant about this. I'm excited about this, right? But that's a good thing for us as players. And I think we're already starting to see this take effect in the very early stages of Battlefield making waves in the scene. Call of Duty's last Ricochet update that went live at the start of Season 5 is basically saying, hey, we saw what Battlefield did, upgrading some of their features and enhancements with their anti-cheat. We're going to do some of that too with TPM 2.0 and Secure Boot. It's not fully live in Call of Duty yet, which I think is a bit of a bummer, but it will be with Black Ops 7, of course. So they're kind of going all in on the anti-cheat at launch for that. But making sure that TPM 2.0 and Secure Boot are required for Black Ops 7 is the same thing that Battlefield just did with the Javelin anti-cheat here in Battlefield 6, already live in the beta, right? And it's been a long time since we've seen an anti-cheat update in Call of Duty. We basically got nothing since Season 3 when Verdansk returned, and that was short-lived. It was only effective for, a little bit. And I don't think it's any coincidence that a week after we see the Battlefield 6 beta announced, revealed, hyped beyond belief, and them going, hey, we're doing enhanced measures for our security on our anti-cheat, Call of Duty was like, oh, we gotta say something. And they do the exact same thing. I think that is a result of Battlefield putting pressure on Call of Duty. You also have Call of Duty, who currently is confident in a way that might not be accurate to reality. They might be a little overconfident. This is an article that we ended up covering the other day, but Activision basically talked to Insider Gaming. Someone at Activision talked to Tom Henderson here at Insider Gaming and basically said that behind the scenes at Call of Duty in these studios at Activision, people are saying, yeah, okay, Battlefield 6 is out there, it exists, but we're not too worried about it because Call of Duty is too big to fail. They're basically saying they know that Call of Duty is a household name. They know everybody buys Call of Duty every year because it's called Call of Duty. It's the same way that Madden sells every year, even though they don't change anything, or 2K sells every year, even though they change the color of the ball. It goes from Spalding to, something else, right? Or something like that. Like, they're minimal changes, yet they sell like crazy every single year. Call of Duty, while it changes maybe a little bit more than those games because it goes from, a Cold War game to a 90s game to Modern Warfare to a little bit futuristic or whatever, and there's new features and there's other modes and stuff, it's still called Call of Duty, and you know exactly what you're getting out of it every single year, so it sells. Even the worst Call of Duty games, Infinite Warfare, Vanguard, Modern Warfare 2 throughout its year, they've sold and they hold players consistently because it's called Call of Duty. So Call of Duty is almost boasting that that's the fact here, but by saying this, even though it's internally, they're not saying it publicly, they're basically admitting, we know we don't have to work hard to, win over players because we are Call of Duty. And that leads to a game that's not good. And that leads to a state that we're in now where we don't really see much innovation in Call of Duty. The content feels very dry and lackluster. The support seems very dry and lackluster, especially post-launch this year. Warzone is sort of snowballing downwards a little bit in terms of its state, its general sentiment, and it doesn't feel like there's that much passion being put into it because it's too big to fail. So no matter what they do, the franchise is so large that it won't matter. I personally look at this and say, that's a terrible mindset to have. As someone who wants to produce quality content, you want to have the best possible product. And they're sort of saying we don't have to because we know people will play regardless. It's insulting to consumers for one, but also now with Call of Duty being in the spotlight, not necessarily for a positive reason, but more so for being called out here, hopefully is going to lead to some shifts in the future. We might see it some with Black Ops 7. Maybe not necessarily at launch because there's only so much time to change things or update things or improve things between now and launch. But maybe throughout post-launch, we get a little bit more attention to detail than what we've seen recently, specifically with Black Ops 6, So it's gonna be an interesting few months here as Battlefield and Call of Duty pitted against each other only heats up more and more as we get closer to the launch of each of these titles. And obviously we've got the beta and everything coming up for Black Ops 7, so we'll have the direct comparison to Battlefield 6 once everything is concluded there. Lots to look out for. Of course, I'll be keeping you guys up to date with all of it, so feel free to hit that subscribe button to ensure you never miss another video. And if you enjoyed this one, a like rating on your way out would be really appreciated. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, take it easy, have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll catch you later. Peace out.